The wind carries death across Caelid's scarlet wasteland, whistling through eye sockets larger than cathedral windows. You stand before one of these colossal skulls, its bone bleached white beneath layers of crimson rot, and realize with a chill that runs deeper than any Ionian swamp water that this thing, whatever it was, could have swallowed a fire giant whole. The jaw alone stretches wider than most boss arenas you've conquered, teeth like ancient monoliths jutting from diseased earth. This isn't just another corpse in a FromSoftware game. This is evidence of something that shouldn't exist, something that predates every legend you thought you knew about the lands between. Welcome, lore seekers, to another deep dive with Keen 7 Lore, where today we're excavating one of Elden Ring's most overlooked yet profoundly disturbing mysteries. These mountainous remains scattered throughout Caelid aren't just set dressing or environmental storytelling flourishes. They're windows into a prehistory so ancient that even the demigods might consider them myths. The skulls embedded in cliff sides, the rib cages that form natural caverns, the vertebrae you mistake for boulders until you notice their symmetry. These are the final testimonies of beings whose very existence challenges everything we understand about the world's hierarchy of power. Consider what you know about giants in the lands between. The fire giants of the mountaintops, those beings mighty enough to threaten Marika's nascent order, beings whose war required the combined might of the Golden Order to suppress. Creatures so powerful that Queen Marika herself had to curse the last survivor to ensure their Forge would never die completely, transforming him into an eternal guardian of a flame that could burn the Erdtree itself. These fire giants tower over us, their single eye gazing down from heights that make our tarnished seem like insects. Yet place a fire giant's skull next to one of these Caelid colossi, and suddenly that fearsome enemy you spent countless attempts defeating looks like a child's toy beside its parent. The sheer impossibility of scale hits you when you truly examine these remains. Where a fire giant's skull might be the size of a modest home, these prehistoric titans possessed heads that rival entire settlements. Their eye sockets aren't just large enough to walk through, they're caverns where entire ecosystems have taken root. Fungal colonies carpet the interior surfaces in bioluminescent carpets, their spores dancing in the fetid air like constellation of decay. Roots thick as tree trunks snake through nasal cavities, having grown for centuries, perhaps millennia, feeding on whatever residual power still lingers in these ancient bones. In Caelid's particular breed of horror, where scarlet rot has transformed the landscape into a nightmare of mutation and decay, these skulls have become something more than mere fossils. They've merged with the corruption itself. Their calcium embrace hosting varieties of rot and fungus found nowhere else in the lands between. The deep crimson staining on the bones isn't just surface contamination from millennia's curse. Look closer, and you'll see how the rot has penetrated into the very marrow channels, creating veins of scarlet through ivory that pulse with a light that shouldn't exist in dead things. Some scholars among the community theorize that the scarlet rot didn't just happen to find these bones, it was drawn to them, attracted to some lingering essence that even complete biological death couldn't entirely extinguish. The placement of these remains tells its own story of catastrophe. Unlike the carefully buried dead of the catacombs or the honored corpses in heroes' graves, these giants died where they fell, their bodies becoming geography rather than receiving burial. In some locations, you can trace the outline of a complete skeleton if you know where to look. A skull protruding from one cliff face, ribs arcing from another hill a quarter-mile away, and what might be a massive femur forming a natural bridge across a ravine. These beings didn't just die, they were scattered, their remains telling a tale of violence so extreme that beings the size of mountains were torn apart and strewn across landscapes. If you're enjoying this deep dive so far, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. It makes a real difference in helping this video reach fellow lore enthusiasts through YouTube's algorithm. Your support means everything and helps keep these in-depth explorations coming. The mystery deepens when you venture beyond Caelid's borders and discover similar remains in the mountaintops of the giants. Here, without the obscuring cover of rot and decay, the bones stand even more starkly against the frozen landscape. These specimens, preserved by cold rather than corrupted by pestilence, offer clearer details about their original forms. The skulls here retain more structural integrity, allowing us to observe features that Caelid's rot has obscured. Massive brow ridges that would have shaded eyes larger than lakes. Jaw hinges engineered to generate bite forces that could have crushed castle walls like eggshells. Cranial capacity that suggests either incredible intelligence or the need to coordinate a body so vast that ordinary nervous systems wouldn't suffice. Yet even these clearer specimens raise more questions than they answer. The fire giants, supposedly the ancient enemies of the Golden Order, still inhabit these same mountaintops. They've built their entire culture around the flame of ruin, centered their civilization on the forge that Marika feared so much she cursed its last keeper rather than risk its complete extinction. But the fire giants show no reverence for these colossal remains. They don't build shrines around them, don't incorporate them into their mythology that we can see, don't even seem to acknowledge their existence. It's as if these prehistoric titans exist in a blind spot of their cultural memory, too ancient or too terrible to remember. This absence of acknowledgement extends beyond the fire giants. Search through every item description, every snippet of dialogue, every environmental clue in Elden Ring, and you'll find virtually nothing that directly addresses these colossal remains. The game's extensive lore covers the war against the giants, the nature of trolls as their descended servants who betrayed their kin, the establishment of the Golden Order, the shattering of the Elden Ring, the various outer gods and their influence. But these skulls, these impossible bones that dwarf everything else in a game full of impossible things, exist in a realm of deliberate silence. FromSoftware has placed them prominently in the world, made them impossible to miss, yet wrapped them in a mystery so complete that even the game's notoriously cryptic storytelling seems to actively avoid explaining them. If you're finding value in this exploration so far, consider subscribing to support the channel and join our growing community of lore enthusiasts. Your support truly makes these deep investigations possible. This silence forces us to look deeper, to examine not what the game tells us, but what it implies through context and comparison. The confirmed canon gives us a framework of giant kind in the lands between. We know that trolls are descended from giants, their strength diminished but still formidable, their betrayal of their ancestors marked by the hollow cavity in their stomachs, where their organs were torn out as punishment or sacrifice. We know the fire giants possessed power enough to threaten the very order of the world, their flame of ruin antithetical to the golden power of the Erdtree. We understand that in the current age, even these diminished descendants and cursed survivors represent apex predators in their respective territories. But then we must reconcile this understanding with the evidence before us. These colossal skulls don't fit the established hierarchy. They don't match the morphology of fire giants, whose distinctive single eye would be immediately recognizable, even in skeletal remains. The skull structure suggests binocular vision, with two eye sockets positioned for forward-facing sight, a predator's configuration, but on a scale that makes the concept of prey almost meaningless. What could beings of such size possibly hunt? What ecosystem could support them? What catastrophe could have killed them? The depth of their burial provides our first temporal clue. In Caelid, despite the geological upheaval caused by the Battle of Aeonia and the spreading Scarlet rot, these skulls remain partially buried in rock strata that predates the contamination. The stone encasing them isn't the soft, corrupted earth of modern Caelid, but harder, older rock that requires significant effort to excavate even partially. Mineral deposits on the exposed bones suggest exposure times measured not in centuries, but in geological ages. These beings died before Caelid became Caelid, before perhaps even the lands between had taken their current shape. This temporal displacement gains credence when we consider what we know about the prehistoric era of the lands between. Before the age of the Erdtree, before Marika's ascension, before even the establishment of what we might recognize as civilization, the world was ruled by the ancient dragons, not the lesser dragons we encounter throughout the game, but the ancient dragons whose scales were infused with the power of golden lightning, whose forms were perfected expressions of draconic might. Above them all ruled Placidusax, the multi-headed dragon who served as Elden Lord in an age before such titles were carved in gold. Placidusax's throne sits in Fara Mazula, a city that exists outside conventional time, crumbling eternally in a storm beyond the world's edge. The architecture of Fara Mazula, with its massive doorways and colossal proportions, has always seemed oversized, even for dragons. The platforms and bridges span distances that suggest inhabitants who measured their stride in geological features rather than mere meters. Could this city, frozen in time, preserve the only remaining architecture built to accommodate beings the size of our mysterious giants? The ancient dragons themselves were beings of incredible size, yet even they pale compared to these skulls. Fortisax, Lanceax, even the mighty Grandsax, whose corpse still impales Lendl, all would be dwarfed by the creatures these bones belonged to. This suggests a prehistoric era with multiple apex species, a time when titans walked the earth in the most literal sense possible. The ancient dragons may have ruled the skies, but something else, something even more massive, claimed dominion over the land itself. Environmental evidence supports this theory of prehistoric coexistence and conflict. The patterns of destruction around some skull sites suggest death by violence rather than natural causes, cracks in the craniums that radiate outward from impact points, teeth broken in patterns consistent with defensive wounds, rib cages collapsed inward as if crushed by forces attacking from above. These beings didn't simply die of age or disaster. They were killed, and killed by something with the power to wage war on their impossible scale. The community has developed numerous theories about these prehistoric titans, each attempting to reconcile their existence with known lore. The most prevalent suggests these were the first children of the Crucible, beings born directly from the primordial chaos that preceded ordered life. The Crucible, that molten font of primeval power from which all life supposedly emerged, might have first produced creatures of impossible scale and power before the refinements that led to more sustainable forms. These firstborn would have been too powerful, too consuming, too destructive to coexist with the developing world. Their very existence might have threatened the stability needed for other life to flourish. This theory gained support from the game's treatment of Crucible-related elements. The Crucible Knights, those who channel aspects of the primordial chaos, manifest abilities that seem primitive yet powerful. Wings, tails, horns, breath attacks. These are described as aspects from when the Erdtree was the primordial crucible, before the greater will's influence refined and ordered it. If modern warriors can channel diluted echoes of the Crucible's power to gain such abilities, what might direct children of that original chaos have been capable of? The scale difference between a Crucible knight's modest tail swipe and whatever these giants could accomplish would be the difference between a candle flame and a volcanic eruption. Another compelling interpretation positions these giants as casualties of the First War for control of the lands between. Before Marika's war against the fire giants, before the dragon's reign, there might have been an even more ancient conflict between these primordial titans and the forces that would eventually establish order in the world. The ancient dragons, with their golden lightning and temporal powers, might have been the weapons deployed against these giants, explaining both their elevation to rulership and the giants' extinction. Placidusax's missing heads might not be from a battle we know about, but from this prehistoric conflict, wounds earned in bringing down beings that could swallow modern dragons whole. The distribution of remains supports a conflict narrative. The skulls appear in Caelid and the Mountaintops, two regions on opposite ends of the lands between. If these were natural deaths or localized extinction, we'd expect concentrations in specific areas. Instead, the scattered placement suggests either a widespread population that died simultaneously, or combatants who fell at different battlefronts of an extensive war. The absence of remains in the central regions might indicate either complete destruction of bodies in those areas, or that these zones were kept clear as neutral ground or killing fields where no trace was allowed to remain. Some lore enthusiasts point to potentially cut content that might have originally addressed these mysteries. Unverified data mining suggests dialogue that may have referred to Radahn as the Slayer of Giants, though this remains unconfirmed speculation within the community. Could Radahn, master of gravity magic and strongest of the demigods in pure physical might, have encountered and defeated giants even larger than those his ancestors faced? The gravity magic he learned in Celia to keep riding his beloved horse might have had another purpose, allowing him to face beings whose sheer mass would make conventional combat impossible. This cut content raises fascinating possibilities about Radahn's true power and purpose in Caelid. His mastery of gravity wasn't just martial prowess, but perhaps preparation for threats others had forgotten existed. The festival of combat, held in his honor, drawing warriors from across the lands between, might have originally served as training for a different kind of battle entirely. When the Scarlet rot took his mind, it didn't just rob the world of a great general, but perhaps its last offender against something ancient, stirring beneath Caelid soil. The Scarlet rot itself takes on new dimensions when considered in relation to these remains. Millennia's curse, born from the sealed god of rot, spreads most virulently in Caelid, where these bones concentrate. The rot doesn't just contaminate, it transforms, mutates, evolves. The massive flowers that bloom from rot-infected corpses, the mushroom colonies that carpet the landscape, the very air that becomes toxic, all of it seems to be building towards something. Some theorize the rot isn't just decay, but a form of recycling, breaking down matter to reconstruct it into new forms. Could it be trying to rebuild something from these ancient bones, using their residual power as a template for new horrors? The fungal growth patterns on the skulls themselves support disturbing possibilities. Unlike normal decomposition, where fungi break down organic matter uniformly, the growth on these bones follows specific patterns. Neural pathways through the skull are traced by bioluminescent varieties. Certain bones accumulate specific types of rot, while others remain mysteriously clean. It's as if the contamination is reading something in the bones, following instructions or patterns laid down in the very structure of these ancient remains. The Scarlet rot might not be randomly corrupting these bones, but purposefully investigating them, learning from them, possibly even attempting to resurrect or recreate them. This interpretation transforms our understanding of the Battle of Aeonia. When Radahn and Millennia clashed, their conflict might have awakened more than just the Scarlet rot. The massive explosion of power, the shattering of the very earth, the transformation of an entire region. Such violence might have disturbed things better left buried. The giant skulls, exposed by the battle's upheaval, could be beacons calling to forces that predate current conflicts. Every spore of rot that settles on these ancient bones might be gathering information. Every fungal network that spreads through their marrow might be establishing communication with something that remembers when these titans walked. The mountaintop specimens tell a different, but equally troubling story. Here, preserved in ice and altitude, the bones remain largely uncorrupted, yet they show signs of interaction with the fire giant's flame. Scorch marks that penetrate deep into the bone suggest exposure to heat beyond normal fire. The fire giant's flame of ruin, that force Marika feared could burn the Erdtree itself, might have been turned against these remains in attempts to destroy them completely. The fact that the bones survived such treatment speaks to their fundamental indestructibility. Whatever these beings were made of, it resists even forces capable of threatening god trees. The fire giant's relationship with these remains becomes more complex when examined closely. Their forge, the kiln of their great flame, sits positioned specifically to avoid the largest concentration of bones. Their paths through the mountains carefully navigate around skull sites. This isn't reverence, but perhaps caution, the kind of avoidance that speaks of ancestral warnings passed down through generations. The fire giants might not acknowledge these remains in their mythology because to do so would be to admit the existence of something that dwarfed even their mighty ancestors, something that reduced their war with Marika to a squabble between inheritors rather than titans. The trolls, those betrayers who sided with the Golden Order against their giant kin, show even stranger behavior around these remains. In areas where trolls patrol near exposed skulls, their patterns become erratic. They avoid direct contact, won't pursue enemies who flee toward the bones, and sometimes can be observed simply standing and staring at the skulls for extended periods before shaking their heads and resuming patrols. This suggests some deep genetic memory, a recognition that transcends their conscious understanding. The hole in their stomachs, that mark of their betrayal, might represent more than just punishment. It could be the removal of an organ that connected them to these prehistoric giants, a deliberate severing of ties to a past too dangerous to remember. FromSoftware's environmental storytelling reaches masterful heights in how they've integrated these remains into the playable space. You don't just observe these skulls, you traverse them, fight within them, take shelter in their shadows. The game forces intimacy with these remains while maintaining their mystery. In one location, you might use a giant tooth as cover during a battle, its enamel still sharp enough to cut after eons. In another, rainwater collected in an eye socket becomes a pool where lesser creatures spawn, life persisting in the architecture of death. These interactions make the remains feel real, tangible, present, while their true nature remains forever just beyond understanding. The implications for the greater Elden Ring cosmology are staggering. If beings of such scale existed before recorded history, it suggests cycles of creation and destruction far grander than the rise and fall of the Golden Order. The Elden Ring itself, that cosmic force that shapes reality, might be just the latest in a series of ordering principles, each one establishing dominance by destroying or suppressing what came before. These giants might have had their own equivalent to the Elden Ring, their own cosmic principle that allowed beings of such scale to exist. Their extinction might mark not just the death of a species, but the fundamental rewriting of reality's rules to prevent such beings from existing again. The various outer gods take on new context when considered against these remains. The greater will, the goddess of rot, the formless mother, the dark moon. All these cosmic forces vie for influence in the current age. But what if they're not the first generation of such beings? What if the giants whose skulls we explore were once the physical manifestations or chosen peoples of even older outer gods, deities whose names and natures have been deliberately erased from history? The current war between cosmic forces might be just the latest iteration of an eternal conflict, with each victory so total that it erases even the memory of what came before. This cyclical interpretation aligns with the game's themes of eternal return and the futility of permanence. The Golden Order sought to create an eternal age, to freeze perfection in place and shattered from its own rigidity. The dragons before them ruled for eons before yielding to change. These prehistoric giants, for all their impossible might, exist now only as landmarks in other beings' stories. No matter how powerful, how vast, how seemingly permanent, everything in the lands between eventually becomes archaeology for the next age to puzzle over. The community's ongoing investigation of these remains has yielded fascinating discoveries through careful observation and data mining. Players have found that the skulls aren't randomly placed, but follow specific patterns related to underground root networks. The Erdtree's roots, those golden white tendrils that spread throughout the lands between, conspicuously avoid direct contact with these bones. They'll grow around them, over them, but never through them. This suggests either the Erdtree recognizes something in these remains that it won't or can't absorb, or there's an active repulsion between the Golden Order's power and whatever residue these bones retain. Even more intriguing are reports from players who've used photo mode and careful positioning to explore normally inaccessible areas around the skulls. Inside some of the larger craniums, past the fungal growth and root systems, they've documented what appear to be crystalline formations, unlike anything else in the game. These structures emit a faint light that doesn't match any known sorcery or incantation color. Some speculate these might be fossilized remains of organs unknown to modern biology, perhaps sensory apparatus for perceiving spectrums of reality current beings can't access, or processing centers for kinds of thought that required crystalline rather than merely organic structures. The artistic direction behind these remains deserves recognition for its psychological impact. Miyazaki and his team didn't just create large skulls. They crafted monuments to extinction that trigger deep evolutionary unease. The specific proportions chosen make these beings feel wrong on a fundamental level, too large to be natural, but too detailed to be fantastic. Every texture, from the porous bone surface to the way light plays through empty sockets, reinforces that these were once living things, despite their impossible scale. The design walks a perfect line between wonder and horror, making players feel like archaeologists discovering evidence of something that challenges their entire understanding of history. This design philosophy extends to how the remains interact with gameplay. You might find yourself in pitched battle with a lesser dragon or avatar, feeling powerful and competent, only to realize the entire fight has taken place in what was once something's mouth. The skull you've been using as an arena could have swallowed your enemy whole when alive. These moments of perspective shift are carefully orchestrated throughout both Caelid and the Mountaintops, constant reminders that no matter how mighty the player becomes, they're still operating in the shadows of incomprehensible predecessors. The sound design around these remains adds another layer of mystery. In quiet moments, especially during certain weather conditions. Players have reported hearing sounds near the skulls that don't match ambient audio anywhere else. Low-frequency rumbles that might be wind through vast passages, or might be something else. The audio team has neither confirmed nor denied whether these are intentional additions or emergent properties of how sound bounces within the skull structures. This ambiguity perfectly matches the remains themselves. Definitely there, definitely significant, but refusing to yield their secrets to analysis. As we piece together fragments of understanding about these colossal remains, we must also confront what their existence means for the game's narrative themes. Elden Ring presents itself as a story about the shattering of order and the struggle to either restore or replace it. But these skulls suggest that such cycles have happened before, perhaps many times. The demigod's war that seems so apocalyptic might be merely the latest in an endless series of succession crises, each one forgetting the lessons of the last. The Tarnished's quest to become Elden Lord gains a different character when considered against evidence that beings vastly more powerful than any Elden Lord once walked these lands and still ended up as nothing more than corrupted bones. The melancholy this realization brings permeates the entire experience of exploring near these remains. They transform Elden Ring from a dark fantasy about fallen kingdoms into something approaching cosmic horror about the ultimate futility of power and permanence. Yet there's also a strange comfort in their presence. If beings of such magnitude could fall, then perhaps the current age's suffering isn't unique or specially cursed. It's simply another turn of a wheel that has been spinning since before the concept of wheels existed, and will continue spinning long after the Erdtree is forgotten and something else entirely rules whatever comes out into the lands between. Returning to Caelid with this understanding transforms the experience of that blighted realm. The horror isn't just the scarlet rot or the mutated creatures or the endless screaming of the infected. It's the realization that this corrupted hellscape is built on the graves of things that make current horrors look trivial. Every step through the red sand is a step over something's remains. Every crimson sky sunset filters through particles that might once have been god beings. The very air you breathe has passed through lungs larger than lakes, been exhaled by things whose mere existence current reality can't support. Yet for all this horror and melancholy, there's something profoundly beautiful about these remains' integration into the living world. Birds nest in nasal cavities. Wolves den in the shelter of massive teeth. Flowers bloom from soil enriched by marrow that once supported impossible life. The bones have become landscape, their death enabling countless smaller lives. This transformation from titan to territory, from being to background, captures something essential about Elden Ring's vision of existence, that nothing truly ends but only changes form, that death is simply life rearranging itself into new patterns. The game's refusal to explain these remains directly becomes its own form of storytelling. By maintaining their mystery, FromSoftware preserves their power to disturb and inspire. The moment these skulls received explicit explanation, they'd become just another lore entry, another problem solved. Instead, they remain gloriously unsolvable, forever challenging players to imagine what could have been, what was lost, what might still be sleeping in bones too ancient for names. They're negative space storytelling at its finest, defined by absence rather than presence, by questions rather than answers. As we near the end of this exploration, it's worth considering what future game content might reveal about these remains. The shadow of the Erdtree DLC and any subsequent expansions might finally address these mysteries directly. Or, in keeping with FromSoftware's style, they might simply add more layers of mystery, more skulls in more impossible places, more evidence of prehistories we can barely imagine. Each new piece of content has the potential to recontextualize everything we think we know, to reveal that our theories were either surprisingly accurate or laughably wrong. The possibility exists that these remains are meant to stay mysterious, that they represent FromSoftware's statement about the limits of knowledge and the permanence of some mysteries. Not everything in a world needs explanation. Some things can simply exist as evidence that the world is older, stranger, and more complex than any single narrative can contain. These skulls might be Elden Ring's way of saying that no matter how deep you dig into the lore, there will always be something deeper, older, and more incomprehensible waiting beneath. This acceptance of mystery doesn't diminish the value of investigation. Every theory we develop, every connection we draw, every possibility we explore adds richness to the experience. The community's collective effort to understand these remains has produced some of the most creative and thoughtful lore discussion in gaming. Whether we're ultimately right or wrong matters less than the journey of discovery, the collaborative archaeology we're conducting on fictional prehistory. These skulls have sparked imaginations and conversations that transcend the game itself, becoming symbols of gaming's ability to create mysteries that feel genuinely mysterious. In examining these colossal remains, we've traversed territories both physical and theoretical. We've considered prehistoric wars between titans whose scale defies comprehension. We've explored the possibility of cosmic cycles that render even gods temporary. We've confronted evidence of extinction so complete that they erased not just species but entire categories of being. Through it all, the skulls themselves have remained silent witnesses, offering no testimony beyond their impossible presence. The scarlet rot continues to spread through Caelid, working its strange alchemy on these ancient bones. The fire giant's flame still burns in the mountaintops, its light flickering across skulls that predate its first spark. Somewhere in the space between these extremes of corruption and preservation, the truth of these remains persists, neither fully alive nor properly dead, caught in the liminal space that defines so much of Elden Ring's world. They are memento mori on a scale that transcends individual death, reminders that entire categories of existence can end, that reality itself is more fluid and temporary than we dare imagine. Perhaps that's the ultimate message of these mysterious giants. Not that they lived, not how they died, but that they existed at all in defiance of what should be possible. Their skulls scattered across the lands between serve as monuments to impossibility itself, to the idea that reality's rules are more suggestions than laws, that with enough power or the right circumstances, anything can exist, however briefly. They're proof that the world is stranger than we know and will always be stranger than we can know, that mystery isn't just an absence of knowledge, but a fundamental property of existence. As we conclude this deep dive into one of Elden Ring's most profound mysteries, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through prehistoric impossibility. These investigations into the spaces between what games tell us and what they merely hint at are only possible because of viewers like you, who share this passion for digging deeper, for looking closer, for refusing to accept that any mystery is truly unsolvable, even when we suspect it might be. Your enthusiasm for these explorations, your theories in the comments, your shared discoveries, they transform what could be solitary speculation into community archaeology. If this exploration of the colossal skulls has given you new perspective on your travels through Caelid and the mountaintops, if you'll never look at those massive bones the same way again, please consider subscribing to join our growing fellowship of lore seekers. Hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss future investigations into gaming's greatest mysteries. And remember, whether you're exploring the lands between or any other digital world, sometimes the most profound stories are told not through exposition or dialogue, but through the silent testimony of things too large, too old, and too strange to ever fully understand. Keep your eyes open. Keep asking questions, and never stop wondering what impossible things died to make the worlds we play in possible. Until next time, this has been Keen 7 Lore, reminding you that in the shadows of giants, we're all just archaeology waiting to happen.